Howdy folks. So I was recently going through some old boxes of stuff and I came across this, which was one of my sort of later childhood prized possessions, and I thought I'd get it out and maybe talk about it a little bit. This is the Archos 605 Wi-Fi portable audio video player, and this thing dates to 2007. In fact, this was released just a couple months after the very first iPhone was announced. So that's the kind of scene in the industry as to when this came out. So the technology wasn't terribly great back then. And Archos was, I should say they still are, they're a small French company. And they really had their own niche in the market for video players. They primarily geared their products towards video playback rather than audio playback like Apple did with the iPod and a bunch of other companies. Because, back then, this was before the iPod Touch, of course, so I think the best, correct me if I'm wrong, I really disliked Apple products, never owned one, but I believe the iPod, what we would call the iPod Classic, was really sort of the best suited to video playback. Primarily because it had the hard drive in it for storing the actual videos themselves, and then of course it had the screen, which was, I believe, was square or pretty close to square, 4:3 ratio. So these products, of course, were really aimed at the video market. And this is the 605. What that means is it's 6 inches, or supposed to be 6 inches across. The screen is not 6 inches, of course. And the 5 means it's 5th generation. I'll insert a picture of the 705, which is quite a ridiculous product. From the pictures, you can only really sort of imagine what it was like, but to actually physically hold one in your hand, of course, they were all in the Best Buy showrooms and stuff. You could pick them up and just realize how absolutely ridiculous they were. But that was the state of the technology at the time. So I went more for this because I wanted it more for audio, but I still liked the ability to do the video stuff on this. And this had some really impressive specs and capabilities for the time that really no one else could do. And to this day, I've never really seen a product quite like this again. Now, this was not the only Archos product I owned. I owned three devices. I owned a successor to this and a small device, both of which I've killed. The small portable audio player, I don't actually know what happened to it. I think it broke. That was when Archos was sort of on their downfall. Unfortunately, once smartphones came out, they lost their market, and now they make really cheap Android-powered smartphones. So they've really kind of devolved as a company. But the other product that I owned was just after this. It was called the Archos 5. It was just sort of their modernization right when the company took the downturn. And I ended up trying to hack the device, and I bricked the bootloader so it doesn't boot anymore. So unfortunately, that thing is dead. I think I still have the parts to it somewhere, but it's useless. It truly is bricked, and there is no way to unbrick it. But I never fucked with this, so this one still works, sort of. And I'll get to that in a moment. And primarily, it's the battery. The battery is original, so it's an 8-year-old going on 9-year-old battery at this point. Of course, lithium-ion does not last that long. And this thing is really harsh on the battery, as you'll find out when I go over the specs. And I want to plug this into a power supply, and we can actually measure how much current it takes and all that stuff. But no one makes the batteries for this anymore, unfortunately. The official Archos part supplier, they don't seem to stock these anymore. And I'm assuming whatever stock they probably had, they ran out of, and they're not making them anymore. So getting a battery that will actually fit inside this is pretty much impossible. So what I'm probably going to do is have to drill a hole in it, run some wires to an external battery pack if I wanted to ever use this again. That's probably how I'm going to have to do it. But anyway, so just a quick overview of the device. It's actually metal. So they've got a metal plate here and a metal plate on the back. And just before I go any further, this is the 30 gigabyte model. So there is a 30 gigabyte hard drive in here. It's a 1.8 inch Toshiba drive. You could buy these up to 120 gigabytes, and they use standard 2.5 inch laptop hard drives. And because of that, they were a little bit thicker, and they used a different case back that was plastic, and the battery was different, everything. So they also made a 4 gigabyte flash version, which was a bit odd. And that used the same case style as this. I think it just had a bigger battery. They put the battery in where the hard drive would be. But this is 30 gig hard drive. So So it's metal case on the front and the back. It's got a speaker here. It is a resistive touchscreen, so you can use the device 100% with the touchscreen or 100% with the buttons. And I really love these buttons. They're rocker style, and you can do everything you want with these or with the screen. And I usually used a combination of both. And it's an interface that really nobody else has been able to match. It really was well designed. I mean, this was when the company was in their heyday, and just the quality of it really feels nice. It had a kickstand. I'm holding this together because I've taken the screws out. It had a kickstand, of course, so that you could you could watch your videos, because of course that was what it was sort of aimed at. The battery and the hard drive are under here. This section is plastic because you can see from the symbol here, the Wi-Fi antenna is under here. And on this side we have our headphone out. TV, we'll get to that. Hard drive, so it's just a standard hard disk access. Charge light on the top, power button, power LED, and this lock button, which also doubled as a TV LCD button. And the idea was this thing could hook up to a TV using this thing, which was an optional accessory you could buy, and it's a DVR station, and it does exactly what you'd expect. You can take the device and dock it here, and of course you can charge it and all that stuff. But what was really nice about it was you could hook it up to a TV using component video, and it also had an input as well. And this thing could be used as a DVR for your shows. So it had a TV guide on here, and you could select schedules, and it would then record onto the device your TV, and then you could pick this up in the morning, and then on your train ride to work or whatever, watch some TV that you recorded previously, which was really nice. Or you could just hook it up to your stereo system or whatever and play stuff like that. And it actually came with a complete remote, complete QWERTY remote control with this kind of interesting directional pad. It had a mouse cursor that would come up on the screen when you were using the remote, and you could interact with it that way. And they just had 2 AAA batteries in the handle. I think these are probably still the original batteries the thing came with. But yeah, I mean, it was really sort of a complete solution. And the display was 768 by 480. Yeah, it was WVGA, I think is what that would have been called. And so, I mean, it was pretty high resolution for the time. And I'm trying to think of all the specs here. It was an Intel processor in this. So this was not an ARM CPU. This was an Intel X scale. I think it ran around 400 megahertz. So it wasn't blazingly fast, but it was a lot more powerful than some of the things you could get at the time. It was Wi-Fi capable, so it did have a web browser, which unfortunately you had to pay for. It was one of those, pay us $20 to unlock the feature, which I think probably everybody paid for it, because I mean that was one of the cool things about it. And it was Opera. It was an embedded version of Opera, and you could browse the web on it. It was doable. I mean, when you compare it to devices before the iPhone, which I mean they sucked ass, it did a fairly good job. But of course, by today's standards, it'd be very close to unusable. But we could probably try it out if it can connect to my Wi-Fi. I don't know if this thing supports the newer types of WPA2 encryption, so it may not be able to connect to my Wi-Fi network. So if I can get it working, I'll try and load up some web pages on it and see what the performance is like, but I don't really know. It played a lot of formats. That was one of the really big nice things about this, is it could play MPEG-4, AVI, WMV, I think it could actually do H.264, JPEG, PNG images for photos. It could do MP3 WMA. It could do FLAC, I believe, which was really nice. You could do lossless stuff on this, which, I mean, it really did everything. It could do PDF. It also had USB host capability. So on the dock, it had this weird USB mini B, and then you could flip this up. They use this thing so you can only plug one in at a time, but it had a USB host mode, so you could plug in flash drives and stuff into it and transfer files. And they claim 17 hours of battery life on this thing. I don't actually remember what it was like, but you could go a day or two without charging it, so it wasn't awful. But yeah, I really love this thing. So I'm going to get out my power supply and hook this thing up. The battery that it came with is I believe 2.8 amp hour lithium ion non-protected cell. So all the protection was done inside the device. And this would be the original cell. I don't ever think I replaced it. Although it did look like I desoldered it at one point. I don't think this is a replacement cell. If it is, I totally forgot I bought one. In which case, I don't know. I don't know. All I know is it doesn't work very well with that cell. So the way you take this apart was there was just the this plastic piece which goes underneath the kickstand with 2 screws. It's kind of fiddly to get off. And then once you remove that, you could slide the back off, and the battery would go in here, so you can see where the 2 wires it would attach with. And this was our hard drive right here, Toshiba 3.3 volt, 500 milliamp. And does it say 30 gigs? It is a 30 gig drive. It says that somewhere on here. But unfortunately, it's got just a ZIF connector, so I can't plug it into a PC or anything cool like that. Try to benchmark it or something. But yeah, this is where all of the processor is somewhere under here, if I remember correctly, because I think this is the part that gets really, really bloody hot when the thing's running. So yeah, I will get out my power supply and we'll see if we can power this thing up. And also, I've just got on my desk just so you can see this was guilty of the nasty proprietary USB plug that they used. They had this weird connector here. So this part was for the USB, and then this was for the DVR dock. So it connected up like this. And if you ever lost that cable, you were so fucked. But yeah, I mean, if you had the dock, you were okay, because then you could just use a regular micro B. This thing just used a 5 volt power plug, so you could just charge this. I think it charged up to 2 amps. Yes, it charged up to 2 amps if you plugged it into this. But actually, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. I'm remembering now. It still charged at 500 milliamps even with the dock, because I think the dock itself used the extra current, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's been a long time since I got this thing out, so I'm slowly remembering all the things you could do with it. But yeah, let's fire it up and let's see if there's anything on it. So I've just got it connected into the dock. The dock is not actually plugged in right now. I've just got the 2 wires here and my bench supply. So this way we can set the voltage and we can see the current it's drawing as we do stuff to it. So let's let that start up. I've set it to 4.2 volts, and the reason why is because this thing really does not tolerate low voltage. In fact, at 4.2 volts, it still won't consider the battery to be fully charged. And at 3.9 volts, it pretty much shuts down. So it really requires a very, very strong voltage. And it's probably due to the ridiculous currents the thing draws. You'll see it draw over an amp doing certain tasks, which is quite a bit by today's standards. So it's fully off. Now this thing had 2 modes. You could either turn it completely off, or you could go into sort of a standby mode where it would start up quickly, but I think it kept the DRAM running or something like that. And we can see what its standby current is. So obviously it's off. So I'll just turn it on and we can watch it boot up. So you can see the hard disk access LED over here, and we're drawing 700 milliamps, and it moves around a lot. But it is kind of awesome to see a hard disk LED on a portable device like this. It's not something you see every day. So this is obviously why you'd want to have the device sort of in the standby mode so that it doesn't take that long to start up every time. So just idling at the home screen, we're drawing 800 milliamps, and that's at 4.2 volts. And okay, it's moving around a little bit, but I mean, that's still quite a lot. It settled down to about 0.7 before, and it wants to turn the screen off a lot
because, of course, the screen, as you can see here, to go from 0.4 to 0.6, 0.7, I mean, the screen draws almost 300 milliamps on its own. So, of course, you want to keep that off as much as possible. So I think I'll probably just zoom in and I'll just read off the power supply as we're doing things, so that way you can get a better view of the actual device itself. Okay, so I've just zoomed in a little bit here to try and get the exposure right. But so this car in the background is my old car. Yeah, nothing really on this has changed in quite a while. I don't think I've turned this on in many years. So anyway, it had video capability, music, photos, it had a file browser, this content portal, which is sort of the precursor to the app stores we know, web browser, which is Opera, the TV guide, and this thing called widgets, which is basically the way you accessed the things you bought in the content portal. You could also buy media as well, but generally speaking, it was pretty shit, and I don't think many people ever did. So just doing this is about 800 milliamps. So I mean, this thing draws about 3.3 watts, just doing whatever. And it had sort of like a system tray, so you had your battery, which is not fully charged even at 4.2 volts, and we have our volume here, which you could adjust with this with this rocker here. That was kind of nice to see. And it had a menu down the side. It disabled the Wi-Fi at all times. You basically had to tell it manually to turn the Wi-Fi on, simply because, I mean, the Wi-Fi drew more power. So I can connect to the Wi-Fi, and it will actually connect. It does understand WPA2, which is nice. So now we've got a little Wi-Fi icon there, and we can actually we can attempt to browse the web with the Opera browser that's on here. And the home page is still set to Google, and it still does load the Google page. So any slowness you get is not due to the network; it's due to the device itself. So we can close the keyboard, and we can drag the page around. We can let's go to one of my websites, which I'll enter the URL, which I've already done here. So let's just go to my blog, which is a very simple site. Now the thing is, it'll keep asking to accept certificates, and it's because I believe the certificates on this have expired. Either that, or I don't remember that many websites using HTTPS back in 2007. So I mean, now we use HTTPS everywhere, but yeah, it basically will ask you to accept every single certificate for every connection on every web page. I tried to load YouTube, and I probably had to dismiss that message probably 20 or 30 times. So either the certificates have expired, or it's not. It's just something that wasn't very common back then. I don't ever remember seeing this lock icon, so it's very possible that most sites just weren't HTTPS. So obviously it's loaded the text, but of course there's no graphics anywhere on this. And this is a very simple page. It's a bit long, but it's a very simple page. So, I mean, it's drawing about an amp right now to render this. So obviously the CPU's chugging away. And I mean, it's still usable even while it's loading, but of course there's no graphics. So by today's standards, this would be pretty much unusable. But I mean, for the time, also, I mean, web pages were simpler back then to some extent. And I believe it used to be able to play YouTube videos, but I don't think the API it used is supported anymore. So there we go. It's starting to load the images in. I'm not going to let this finish, just because in the interest of time. But that's the kind of performance you could expect on a 400 megahertz X scale. So for audio, I don't know what's on here. I really did like their interface. It was really quite nice. It was with all the sort of the semi-transparent look. I mean, they really did a good job on it. And it doesn't have a terrible amount of music on here, and most of it's really shit music too. My taste in music has changed quite a lot since this. But the music player was good. Unfortunately, I'll have to mute this for copyright reasons. But I really liked the way that you could see what tracks it was going to play. You could set up all sorts of stuff. You could do ratings. You could set bookmarks and all that good stuff. And of course, the interface was fully usable with the buttons as well. So you could seek things. You could play, pause, change the volume, all that stuff. And of course, you could keep the audio playing in the background while you viewed photos. That was the only thing you could do. It could multitask photos and music at the same time, but you couldn't multitask anything else. So you couldn't browse the web while listening to music or anything like that. That was not possible. As soon as you tapped anything else, it would just go out of it. Photos, it's got really no photos on here. It's just got 2 photos. It doesn't have that much in it. And you could tap and hold, and it would zoom in. And as you scrolled around, it would give you that wait hourglass as it tries to load in that section of the image, because I believe it didn't have enough RAM for the entire image at that resolution, so it had to move around. Yeah, it was quite bad by today's standards, but I mean that was probably a 10 megapixel image, so I guess it's not that bad. Videos, there's not much on this, unfortunately. More just really shitty music videos, and these are not very good quality either. I believe it could play low quality HD, maybe. And you could change the picture format, so you could deal with 4:3 and all that stuff, which was nice. The TV guide, of course, doesn't do anything because it has no program data for now, because whatever service this probably scraped no longer exists. And the widgets, pretty much, it just had Opera widgets, these games you could buy, which I never bought, and it could play Flash games, but it obviously doesn't have any. I think I did have some at one point, but they've all been removed. File browser was just sort of your standard, you could browse 2 different things and you could copy them. I've tried to scan the network to see if it can find any of my Samba servers, but it can't for some reason, so I'm not sure if it just doesn't go across subnets, or I don't know. But you can't type in an IP address or something for it to connect to, so I'd love to be able to stream stuff, but I can't do that. That sound you're hearing is actually the fan in my power supply starting up, because it's heating up because this thing's drawing so much power. That battery really must have had a real awful life in this thing. So just to look at this system, yeah, it's only 27% full, so it really doesn't have much on here. USB preference, it had the ability to basically it just acted like a normal hard disk, and this auto arclib here, it basically would check all of the changed files every time you unplugged it, and it would then determine what had changed, add it to its own internal database for the audio and video. So that, it was nice because you could use it on Linux, you could use it on any operating system, and that was really nice. It had parental control. Plugins was kind of annoying. I bought the web browser but didn't buy any of the other stuff. And this was the latest firmware, I think, ever released for it, 2.1.04. I'm not going to bother to even check at this point. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, this was really ahead of its time. And, well, at least I thought it was anyway. And it could do some pretty cool stuff. And, as for power consumption, it seems that at most it draws about 1.1 amps. Sort of at idle, it draws around 500 milliamps with the display off. And if the hard disk turns off, which it will do when you're playing music and stuff, I know this is out of focus, but not much I can do about that. Right now, the hard drive is off and the screen is off, and it's drawing 100 milliamps. So that's sort of its lowest power possible mode. And it didn't have enough RAM to store an entire, 3 or 4 minute track. So if you wanted to I mean, if you were just listening to a song, it would actually have to wake up every 30 seconds to a minute to refresh the buffer from the disk. So, I mean, it wasn't terribly great in that respect. But if I just hold the power button down to do this whole suspending operation, I doubt I'll be able to measure the current on my, yeah, so it reads 0 on my my power supply, but I guarantee the current's not actually 0. I can try to use my clamp meter. I don't unfortunately have an inline power meter that does low currents. Yeah, I can't reliably measure the current with a clamp meter down at this low level, so I don't really know. But it definitely was higher than if you did the whole complete power off. And you see, it boots much faster when you do that. I'm sorry about the focus on this. But it did have the option to do this complete power off, which was a true proper system shutdown. And I'm not entirely sure what kernel this thing runs. I don't know if it's Linux. I really don't know. But I mean, the software for the newer versions was definitely hackable, but I don't know about the software for this thing. I don't know if this was hackable. I never really bothered with it, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's really all there is to show for this. It was quite a cool product, and I just thought I'd go over it and sort of reminisce of all the good times I spent with this. I might try and somehow connect up an external battery to to those just wires and somehow get it through the case, and I'll just carry it around with a battery pack, just sort of to get it working again. Put some new music on it, maybe have some sort of retro. Okay, I don't really want to call this thing retro, but it feels that way, even though it's really not that old. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'll do with this. It's just a little bit of nostalgia. That's all. So anyway, now that I've waffled on about some piece of completely obsolete technology for what is it, like 20 minutes now? Yeah, I should shut up. Anyway, thanks for watching.